Hey NCCF, it's so good to be doing an episode of Crosspoint today. And man, if you are not catching these every day, you should be. Set a reminder or something to help you remember to go back and watch these and pick up one every day, engage with it. Let us know what you're learning and what you want to learn about. And just in general, we want to know what God is doing in your life. And this Facebook group is a great way to do that. It's a great way to let us know what God is doing and also let us know what you are waiting for God to do, what those prayer requests are. It's okay to use your church community on Facebook here for support. So do post your questions, post your prayer requests, and don't forget to post your praises too. It's important to remember and recognize and see the things that God is doing. But today, I get to talk about one of the sections of scripture that we hear a lot, and many of you probably have memorized. It's Philippians 4:16, and one of the things that I think we like about it, and the reason that it is something that we gravitate towards, is because it's kind of simple and it's comforting. But it says, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God." Anxiety is a big topic today. And I don't think that there's anybody in this group that could say that they didn't struggle with some level of anxiety or at least know someone who does. So there's literally no reason to toss this topic out or to not pay attention to this particular scripture, because if we don't need it in the moment, we will need it in another moment, or we'll be equipped to help someone else who needs peace, and you would not be able to say that you don't know someone who needs peace. And so pay attention to this scripture, and if you don't feel that you need it for yourself in this moment, at least gain the tools that you could use to help someone else through a season where they need peace. But we don't live in a very peaceful time. And I think that can be somewhat reflected in our interactions, maybe in our responses, sometimes in our attitudes, our awareness. It all can tend to reflect sometimes the lack of peace in the world around us. And I know this for me, like if I've spent too much time in the news, sometimes my responses can carry the stress of the world with them, and that interaction takes on a stress that it didn't need to take on because I'm carrying something from the world with me. And I don't know if you've ever kind of thought about that, but like maybe your interactions are carrying stress. And with the amount of stress that's happening in our world, it would certainly be hard not to have your interactions carry some stress from the world with them. But I love how this verse is phrased. How it says, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God." In short, it's saying don't be anxious, but man, you better pray about it. Don't be anxious, but give it to God. And I know for me, and probably for you, and all of the signs at Hobby Lobby or any other store for that matter that have this be anxious for nothing theme that goes with them, a lot of times it stops at don't be anxious for nothing. And that kind of like is the end of it, like don't be anxious. And we kind of react to that in a way like, well, how am I going to do that? How am I going to not be anxious? Like, have you seen the world we live in? Like, how am I supposed to just be at peace? And that kind of the reaction within us is like, man, that's hard. That's challenging. How am I going to do that? How am I supposed to be at peace? And then we kind of forget that the scripture itself tells us exactly how we're going to do that. It doesn't say, do not be anxious, and then just drop off. Like, it gives us a whole section that tells us how we're going to do that. And sometimes when I'm reading through scripture and I see something that Jesus commands that seems impossible, like I read something like do not be anxious, and it just seems impossible. I like to remember that we don't serve a God that has empty commands. We don't serve a God with commands that are impossible when partnered with him. Which means that if I'm reading scripture and I read something that seems impossible, I like to ask myself a couple questions. One of those being, am I assuming that I have to do this on my own? Because if my reaction is to jump immediately to, well, this is impossible. This is not even a thing I could do. There's no way I could be at peace. There is no chance that I will live without anxiety. There is no chance. This is not a thing. This is not possible. I think the question is, am I assuming that I have to do it on my own? Because if that's my automatic reaction is, well, this is impossible, I could never do that, then maybe I'm assuming that the commandment that the Lord is giving is something that I'm supposed to do by myself. And Jesus gives us commandments, but not without an ability to partner with God to make sure that they happen. And so looking at that and kind of saying the scripture, well, man, if it seems impossible, am I assuming that I have to do it by myself? Am I assuming that this whole thing is something that I'm supposed to take care of on my own? The second thing that I like to ask if I read something that leads me to believe or think in some way, shape, or form that it's completely impossible to do what God has asked me to do through that scripture is, have I read the whole thing? Because a lot of times in scripture, we take little snippets and little things, and sometimes out of context, or sometimes just without reading the rest of it to help us figure out how we're going to do that thing. And this scripture very specifically tells us how we're going to do it. It tells us how to not be anxious and how to be at peace. And there's two specific things here. One, it says, with thanksgiving, be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. The natural act of gratitude requires us to look back. It requires us to glance at the past and to see the things that are good, and to look and see the ways within which God has come through before, the ways that God has come through in our past. And doing that allows us to be reminded of all of the ways that God can come through again, because God is faithful. And if anything, the gratitude piece of all of this, with thanksgiving piece of all of this, requires us to look at what God has already done and anticipate what he can do in the future because of his faithfulness. And we know when we look back and we're grateful for what he's already done, that he's capable of doing those things again and coming through again. The second thing in this scripture is the with prayer piece. That be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. It's that don't be anxious, but give your anxiety to God. A lot of times, just the act of prayer, even if it hasn't answered our questions yet, or the act of even if it hasn't answered our questions yet, or the act of prayer, we don't have some sort of immediate response, like God says, go do this and that will fix this problem. Just the act of giving it to God gives us peace. And you've probably heard the illustration before because I've used it and I know a lot of other people have. But if you think about football for a brief moment, imagine Russell Wilson, and we know that he has a tendency to carry the football a little too long. And it stresses us out all the time. If you watch football, you know what I mean. But imagine how stressed he is. He's carrying the football, which is the weight of everything that game has. And he has an entire team that is literally working hard to get to the ball that he has. And there's a lot of anxiety that I'm sure goes with that moment for him. But then think about that reality when he throws that ball. The entire team that's been out to get him and what he's holding on to is now out to get someone else and some other thing and it's not focused on him at all. They are shifting their focus to wherever the ball has gone. And I like to think about that in a context of if we're holding on to something, whether we've held on to it for a minute or whether we've held on to it for way too long, the release of that stress and anxiety of holding on to it when we give it to God is pretty huge and can be a really big relief in that moment. And the devil is focused on making sure that whatever you're holding on to is going to wreck you. Whatever you're holding on to is going to fill you with anxiety. And that's his job. He's going to make sure that whatever he can get you to hang on to that can make you stressed and anxious, that's what he does. That's what he wants. And if you give it to God, the devil has to follow that. And he has to take that fight up with God, not you anymore, because you're not holding on to it. So I guess kind of the questions that I have for you this morning, and kind of in this place of talking about anxiety and giving your requests to God and being grateful for the things that God has already done, is, man, what stressors are you hanging on to that you should be giving to God? And are you giving thanks? Are you looking back at your life with gratitude and reminding yourself of all of the ways that God has come through in the past? And I would encourage you today, if you are still watching, to throw something in the comments that God has come through on for you, and maybe that can serve as an encouragement to someone else. All right, have a great day.